That satisfying moment when a tortilla inflates like a balloon and becomes soft and fluffy. It's science. But exactly what's happening here, and how can we get a consistent puff in our kitchen? Well, for today's video, we're gonna learn. I made tortillas with 3 different heat sources so we can see why sometimes it's a struggle to get that fluff. I made it on a griddle, which goes up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. That ends up being medium-high heat. But then I also made it on a conventional stove with a normal pan, a non-stick that you can get at most dollar stores or grocery stores. And then lastly, I used my favorite, my induction cooker, which is a controlled heat source, and I used a stainless steel pan non-stick, which is flat. Now let's learn the science behind this. Now we don't need much for a successful puff. Just hot water to react to starch, enough salt to bind it all, and of course, corn flour of your choice. I used Maseca, but there are many others that get the job done. The spatula and kitchen towel are auxiliary items that we should not be ashamed to use, even though some YouTubers might make it seem like, oh, you're not a pro if you're using it. It's okay. You know what? We just do what it takes to get a little taste of the glory.
See what it tastes like.
Now that we have all our ingredients ready, you know what time it is. Step 1. So, our masa, or the corn dough, has to be of really good quality and it has to be relatively moist. Now to simplify this whole process, we're only going to work with 1 cup of flour, and then you can scale up from here. And then we add 0.25 to 0.35% of salt, which in this case ended up being for me more or less about a 1/4 teaspoon. We mix that first for a minute or 2, and once the salt is mixed into our flour, we can begin by adding the water. In total, we shouldn't need more than 80% of water per cup of corn flour. All depends on the brand and the humidity of where we live. It's a good idea to start small and to add gradually, so I started with a 1/4 cup and poured little by little. On average, I usually need about 3/4 of a cup of water, in other words, 75%. But it will be different in your case, so just play around with it until you get close to a wet-ish Play-Doh consistency, and you'll be good to go. Something fascinating that I found is that the amount of needed water will differ depending on where you live. Here in Canada dry, I often have to add a higher percentage of water to my mix, where in southern Mexico I can be safe after adding just 70% because it's so humid. Regardless of where we live, we can know if our dough is on point by grabbing a small ball of dough, pressing it to a flat shape, and if the edges crack easily, we need more water. Just for kicks, I'm gonna keep this ball for later just to show us how crucial it is to have a moist masa if we want the puff. Something that I've been trying recently to speed up my process, and it does seem to work, is just make little small balls of your desired size of tortilla, place them into the bowl, and that way we can make them quicker once it's time to cook. The only downside to this is that the balls can dry up faster, so that's why I'm keeping my cup of water close to me, because I will have to rehydrate each ball just before I cook it. And we let them rest for at least 20 minutes so that the moisture can really just seep in. Not a lot of science going on in here, but there is some things that we want to keep in mind. When we're pressing, we moisten the dough ball again if you live in a dry place. Just work it a little bit for a few seconds. We press just to see if it's moist enough, no cracks, good sign. And once we place it into the press between the 2 pieces of parchment paper, or in my case Ziploc bag, it doesn't require a lot of force. If yours is cast iron, a little bit of force is enough. And we're looking for a thin tortilla, but not too thin that makes it impossible to remove from the plastic.
Dr. Hahn, I am a surgeon.
If it has no cracks on the edges, that means it's moist enough. And if our pan is hot enough, then this will puff up. Let's go see your pan. So here we are on our first griddle, or our first pan and cooking surface where I'm gonna make the tortillas. This is a Black & Decker griddle. It fits about 6 to 8 tortillas, and it can get to a high heat of 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius. We can tell that it's hot enough by the way the water dances on the surface, but as we're gonna see, there is a huge downside to using a griddle. Many of the videos we'll watch on YouTube, or many of the places where we'll read on how to make these tortillas, will say that Ideally, it's 15 seconds on one side, then we flip it again, 15 seconds on that side, and then we flip one last time for 10 to 15 seconds or until it puffs. However, this is not an ideal cooking surface. You see, this griddle has a large ring that goes around the edges. Therefore, the surface as a whole never really reaches that medium-high temperature that we need it to be evenly. Because of this, the tortilla never really gets enough of a heat shock to steam and puff, resulting in a total embarrassment. Nevertheless, this surface still works, and we do use it when we need to make hundreds of tortillas at a time. We just keep a spatula around or a little towel to apply pressure on that last flip and force that puff to happen. You can do the same. Next up is the conventional stovetop with a classic affordable Tefal non-stick pan. But there's a catch. The pan is warped in the middle. So what do you think is going to happen when we flip it one last time? We have it set to medium high, which is number 7 on my stove, and it's warm enough because the water danced around. But as we can see, due to the uneven contact with the heat source, it doesn't puff up as it should. So here at our house, we help it out with our tools, either a spatula or a towel. Now another option is we could raise the temperature of the stove, but then we risk burning them before they can even puff up. My point is that we all have different cooking surfaces, and we all live in different climates and can achieve different levels of heat. So I encourage you to test out your own cooking tools and find that balance that will work with what you have. Some tortillas will take longer than 15 seconds on each side to make sure it's ready. So just test it out. Here on this stove, it takes about 20 seconds on each side in order to get that final puff. I left the best for last. This is my induction cooker from IKEA. It's 60 bucks Canadian, super cheap, very affordable. But of course, with that price, there are some cons.
Okay.
That doesn't matter though, because it can achieve a very high temperature and stay there every time. Now my stainless steel non-stick pan from IKEA also works great because it's not warped, so even distribution of the heat. It's in constant contact with that heat source. Because of that consistency on a flat cooking surface and a moist tortilla, we are able to get that puff and the fluff every single time. The downside is, because it's from IKEA and it's cheap, even though I have it on 5, my pan will easily overheat and go above that set level, that medium-high temperature, resulting in sometimes burning my own tortilla. So you just keep an eye on it. We bring it down sometimes to 3, we take it, let it cool, and keep cooking, then back up to 5, and we just move around between those 3 different numbers, 3, 4, 5. Now I want to show you this. If your tortilla is dry, and this is a crazy example, but it's just to really drive the point home, it doesn't matter how much you press on it or how hot your pan is. If your dough is dry when you're working with it, it'll be very difficult for it to puff up. There's just no moisture to boil, no steam.
You ride to jail. You undercook fish, believe it or not, jail. You overcook chicken, also jail. Undercook, overcook.
And that's it. If we followed all these steps together, we can make our tortillas puff every single time we make them. Just remember to keep that dough moist, because that's a key component to this. Have enough heat and find the balance of your cooking surfaces so that you can get that shock reaction and make it fluff up, puff up, and taste delicious as it should.